Thanks. For anyone who's first timer, I'm Paul Fanlett of the Capital Times, and all of us, I just wanted to stop on this again on this last day. All of us associated with the IdeaFest so appreciate you, our audience, and have all week. We've been talking about the engagement, the enthusiasm with David Marinas and others, and we just really a big deal to us. What better way to start things than to hear from the leaders of Wisconsin's two major political parties this close to Election Day? I'm going to thank our sponsors and partners right now, and bear with me a second. Epic Systems, Exact Sciences, HealthX Ventures, UW Health, the Carbone Cancer Center, Madison Gas and Electric, the Ascendium Education Group, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our co-sponsors are the University Research Park, the Century House, Overture Center for the Arts, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, the Wisconsin Historical Society, Madison Community Foundation, Cargo Coffee, La Follette School of Public Affairs, Madison College, Leopold's Books, Bar, Cafe, and the Forward Theater Company. Our partners include Hinckley Productions, Civic Media, the Wisconsin State Journal, and Madison.com. A couple of notes at this first session of the afternoon. Our host, the UW-Madison, is committed to freedom of speech and freedom of expression as an essential part of the education mission. We expect that the audience will allow our speakers' presentations to occur without disruption. Any disruptions, the event will be handled swiftly by security, and of course, please silence your cell phones and refrain from flash photography. Now, on to the speakers. Brian Schimming has been the chairman of Wisconsin's Republican Party since 2022 and is a 30-year veteran of state politics and political campaigns. From 2015 to 19, he was also Chief Operating Officer for WHEDA, the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. We were talking backstage and didn't realize that he started in the Capitol about the last year in the mid-'80s. I'd been a Capitol reporter for the Wisconsin State Journal, and so we didn't know each other at the time, but we briefly overlapped. And it's, I'd just like to just pause a second and say how much I appreciate him agreeing to appear at Cap Times IdeaFest. And you can, I think that's really appreciated. Ben Wikler is a Madison native and has led the state Democratic Party since 2019, overseeing its efforts in support of President Biden's election in 2020, Governor Evers' reelection in 2022. Before joining the party, Ben was the Washington director for MoveOn.org, and before that was executive vice president of Change.org. Our moderator today is Aaron McGroarty, who joined the Capital Times last year as a political and state government reporter. Prior to coming to Wisconsin in 2021 to earn her master's degree in journalism from UW-Madison, Aaron worked as a policy and government reporter for 3 years in Alaska. Again, I would like to thank Brian and Ben for making time in what I'm sure are unimaginably overloaded schedules to be here. With that, please welcome Brian, Ben, and Aaron to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. My name's Aaron McGroarty. I'm one of the political reporters with the Cap Times. To my left, your right, we have Republican Chairman Brian Schimming. And to my right, your left, we have Democratic Party Chairman Ben Wikler. So today we're going to be discussing, both the state landscape here in Wisconsin, as well as the role that Wisconsin's going to be playing in the national election, which we know is a pivotal role. And towards the end of the event, Chris Murphy, who is there with his hand up, will be handing out cards for you all to write questions if you'd like, and we'll be collecting those towards the end of the event, and I will be reading a couple of those as we have time. So I just want to start by thanking both of you for being here today. You two are among the prime knowledge holders of kind of the political situation here in the state, as well as the role that we play on the national stage. I know that you have previously said, Wisconsin is not one of 50 states, we're one of 5 when it comes to this election. So we are going to be playing a deciding role. But before we get to the national stage, I would like to start with state politics. We have brand new legislative maps, which have really shaken up the race for the legislature here in the fall. And I will be starting with you, but of course we'll be asking for your perspective on this one as well. Brand new legislative maps that has change the way that folks campaign. Democrats are very confident that they can flip the assembly, take some power back in the Senate. How have these new maps changed the way that you and your candidates campaign?
Thank you, Aaron, so much for moderating today. Brian, it's great to be with you. And Paul and everyone at the Capitol Times, thanks for bringing us both together in a bipartisan fashion for some good Wisconsin politics. And thanks, everyone, for being here today. And holy smokes, what a difference it makes to have fair maps in our state. We've had a lot of years, 14 years, where we knew in advance who would win the majority in both chambers of the legislature. The only question was whether Republicans would get a supermajority that could override a governor's veto by winning half, sometimes less than half of the votes in the state. And that is now out the window. But it's not just that the majority is more likely to determine who has the majority of the seats now. And I should say in the state Senate, it'll take 2 election cycles because only half the chamber is up at any given moment. So we are fighting to get to 15 seats on the Democratic side, and then we hope to get the majority in 2026. In the state assembly, if we do exactly as well as Joe Biden did in 2020, with the same distribution of votes, and we hold all those votes for the state legislative candidates, Democrats will get 49 out of 99. That's up from 35, so 14 flips, but 1 short of a majority. If we do as well as Governor Evers did, he won by 3.4 points, we get 52 out of the 99, an actual majority. And the striking thing is it's not just the fact that the seat distribution will match the vote distribution much more closely. It's also that there are many, many more hyper-competitive seats. So there are 10 districts in the state assembly where Biden won or lost by less than 2 percentage points. And that means that in all those districts especially, and in the ones kind of clustered around that on either side, the candidates are actually forced to compete for majority support with voters that reflect the even division of the state of Wisconsin. And I think that creates an opportunity for accountability for, frankly, a lot of Republicans who have voted in the state legislature as though they lived in a deep, deep red state instead of purple Wisconsin for a number of years. And it means that both candidates, all the candidates, have to actually campaign, show up, knock on doors, be responsive to their constituents. Certainly Democrats have been working very hard even in districts that were prohibitively gerrymandered for years. But now the level of engagement from the candidates and the engagement that we're seeing in response from volunteers, the energy on the ground, it's through the roof. And it's very exciting. And if Democrats do everything in their power, I would not say we're confident in the majority, but we're confident that if we put in every possible ounce, every iota of energy we have to make the case for freedom and opportunity to Wisconsin voters, then we could win the majority by an inch. And that's exactly what we're going to fight to do.
And Chairman Schimming, I have heard from Republican candidates who feel confident, we've held a majority for a long time. This is what the voters want. They feel confident they'll be able to hold the majority. What are you hearing from your candidates, from seat holders, about how they're planning to hang on to that majority in the Assembly?
Well, first of all, thanks to you and thanks to the Capitol Times and my colleague here. And this may stun some of the people in the crowd, but I'm actually a Republican from Madison, Wisconsin. I grew up a mile from here on Lathrop Street by the stadium. And so I've literally been reading the Capitol Times since I was a kid, quite literally, actually.
Love to hear that.
And both of my parents worked on campus here as well. And so for me, it's fun to be back here. I'll say this about the legislature. I never realized, after having watched almost 4 reapportionments, in spite of my youthful good looks, I'm 64 years old. And I have watched the last almost 4 reapportionments. And I had forgotten all those years that the Democrats were in control, that it was possible that they were doing the maps for themselves. So this is obviously a new thing that just suddenly occurred. So that's number one. Number two, the truth, and I say this as well as being a former caucus director for the Republicans in the legislature, the Democrats' problem on legislative seats are not these maps. It's a misnomer. I mean, the maps, I'll never say the maps don't have an effect, and I won't say it today. But their problem is not the maps per se. Their problem is almost 37% of their statewide vote is about a 40 square mile area in Milwaukee and Madison. So when you hear the comparison to statewide percentages, that's got some relevance to it, but with legislative maps, their bigger problem is so much of their vote is concentrated in 2 cities. It follows. You don't need to be don't need to have taken a stats class to get that figured out. So when I look at the maps and, they get changed by the legislature, the, court or something like that, I think the Republicans are in good shape, certainly in the Senate. I think it will be closer, no doubt. I think Ben's right. It'll be closer in the Assembly than it is in the Senate. You have a lot of incumbents. You had some incumbents who dropped off. Did you have incumbents drop off on the map issue? Or
We've had a couple.
Yeah, and we've had some incumbents drop off on the map issue. But I'm traveling the state all the time, including last week, and this week this is actually another wonderful reason because I'm home. And I feel very confident. And frankly, if the governor's percentage or the Biden percentage of it is an indication of what they think they're going to do in legislative elections, I wouldn't base my strategy on that. I think it could be much closer. No, I don't have any doubts that it could be much closer. But their bigger problem is most of their vote is in 30, 40, 50 square miles.
And so when it comes to campaigning, how do you know that you found that key candidate? When you are searching for a new face in politics, how do you know you've found the one? Is it experience? Is it name recognition? Is it charisma? How are you able to pick a new face in politics and say, you've got it?
That is a really good question. Well, I'll say this, having recruited a lot of legislative candidates, let me put that hat on. When I came to it, and I was recruiting candidates as a state party, I was the political director at the state party at the time. And you try to match a candidate demographically and politically to a district. I think a problem that Republicans had historically and that I tried to fix when I was there, it seemed, and I'll probably say some things that sound critical of my own party here, but that's part of what I do. So, is that we tended a little bit too much in the previous 24 years. So when we took over the assembly in 1994. When we took the assembly in 1994, we had 41 seats. Had not been in the majority since Warren Knowles was governor, if anybody remembers Warren Knowles. It's been a long time, 24 years. Okay. And it seemed to me like we were trying to recruit the same candidate. It was like, a middle-aged guy who had a Woody station wagon, 2.3 children, and a white picket fence. And so I'd always say at the workshops when I was like training people how to recruit candidates, loosely as an example, I'd be like, don't recruit the grocery store owner, recruit the checker. Recruit the person who sees 300 people a day or whatever it is, right? So I was trying to take them to a place, not just demographically, but in terms of who can really connect with that district. And we spent a lot of time on that. And actually, when we won the assembly, we picked up a bunch of seats in the Clinton year in '92, and then picked up the majority in '94. And at that time, it was a fair number of Republican candidates, middle-aged women, Republican candidates, running against Democrat men. And one thing, whether it's recruitment or campaigns, you need a contrast. You need to have people go, okay, I want this one or that one, and understand what the differences are. And so that was important to me. I recruited a lot of women to run for the legislature. I read a side story, but as a reminder, when the Democrats originally picked up the assembly in the 70s, in 1970, I asked the majority leader, Democrat majority leader, and I were out having a beer one night, and I said, how did you do that? And he said, you know what? He said, we went out and recruited a lot of teachers who were at that time were not making a lot of money. So running for the legislature was a good thing for him to do, career-wise, right? And so John Mettinger in La Crosse, he named off like 5 or 6 of them. He said, that's how we took it over, is we just changed what people were doing. And that's what I tried to do when I was with the Republicans, is get candidates that are relevant to the district that they live in. And for the most part, that worked pretty well for us, and we took the majority.
And the same question to you, how do you find that one candidate that you're like, ha, that's what they've got?
So I think the first core thing, exactly as my esteemed colleague said, is finding people who are a good match for their district. And that means in part that they love their district and that the people in the district love them. So I think of like Joe Sheehan, Sheboygan is a community that was divided in half to make 2 red districts, and it's actually a bluish purple town. Now it's reunited under fair maps. It used to be kind of poster child for redistricting. And Joe Sheehan was the superintendent of schools for a long time and knows everybody. And he's a beloved figure in people's lives. They have memories of him throughout their life, and he's now running for the state assembly. His connection to that community is indelible. Yiling Zhang is another example. He's running in the 85th Assembly District. He's been an elected official since he was a teenager. He's been the president of the county board. He's been a school board member, vice chair of the school board right now. He's led the Hmong Wausau Festival and the Hmong American Center there. And just everybody knows him, and he describes himself as annoyingly moderate because his whole thing is being able to get along with people across the political spectrum in a place where there's a whole spectrum of people's politics. And so a piece of it is demographic, but a lot of it is actually about the kind of goodness of fit socially, people's ability to connect with people in their district. I'd add one more thing, which is, comes from Nancy Pelosi, who spoke here on Monday, but she says, know your why. Know why you're doing it. And one of the biggest tells in a conversation with a potential candidate is to ask them why they're running. If people have a deep core motivation to do it that is bigger than wanting to be something, but is actually about wanting to do something when they're in office, that can allow people to go through what is sometimes hell for candidates. I mean, people take very intense personal attacks, but when it's about something bigger than themselves and it's actually about creating change, that's when people are willing to fight, willing to take incoming, and willing to do the hard work. The people who work the hardest in the closest districts wind up winning, and that's a key thing that we look for.
And so flipping to, the national landscape, Wisconsin is annoyingly moderate. We're very purple, very complex here. In this upcoming election, are you trying to, get that big turnout from reliably blue voters, or are you hoping to swing people in the middle? And I'll ask you the same question.
So the only way to win Wisconsin, we'll probably both say this, is an all-of-the-above strategy. You have to do persuasion and turnout. And I sometimes meet people from outside Wisconsin who say the swing voter is mythical. There's no such thing. And I point to the 10-point gap where the math is a little more complicated than this, but sort of 1 in 10 voters voted for Scott Walker and Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin in 2018, and 1 in 20 voted for Ron Johnson and Governor Evers in 2022. And there are people who cross over. Novak in the state assembly, a Republican, outruns the top of the ticket election after election. And on our side, Doyle runs in the 94th, does better than Democrats are doing, than all the other Democrats in his district are doing. And I've knocked doors with him and met people who say, you're the only Democrat that I'd ever vote for. Those voters do exist. And also, there are hundreds of thousands of people on both sides who agree with Harris and with Baldwin and with Democrats, but don't vote. And on the Democratic side, and people who like Trump but have not voted on the Republican side. Turning out those voters can also make the difference. And what's so striking is if you look at 2020 versus 2016, we had very similar margins. Democrats lost by 0.7% in 2016, won by 0.6% in 2020. But there were 300,000 additional voters who led the way to that. So we had a huge amount of turnout, persuasion in both directions. And on the, for Biden, we were able to edge across those two pieces just by a little bit. What looked like a tiny swing was actually a giant arms race on both sides. And I should say, I want to tack on to my previous answer. So Greta Neubauer is the Democratic Assembly leader. She leads and led the recruitment in the state assembly. Dianne Hasselbein is our amazing state Senate leader. She led the recruitment in the state Senate. And having chamber leaders that are this engaged and hands-on has been extraordinary. We have 97 out of 99 assembly districts. We have Democratic candidates, and all 15 Senate districts we have Senate candidates this year. So hats off to them, and I've learned so much from their work on recruitment.
And so as far as getting voters out, are you hoping to turn out the loyal Republican voters or, grab some of those middle-of-the-road voters that, Trump will need if he's hoping to win this election?
Yeah. So I was on CNN with Wolf Blitzer the other day, which may surprise some of you. And so what I say, having recruited before, too, and I agree with a lot of what Ben says, on our end, because Donald Trump is able to appeal across. I mean, when we're leading with Teamsters, in surveys with Teamsters, 58 to 30 something, that's a crossover appeal. And frankly, people, that's not the only union where we have that not quite that advantage, but people in this crowd might be surprised at his crossover appeal that he has. And so that's helpful. Wisconsin, and for those of you who've been around Wisconsin all your lives like I have, we're about 6 million, a little under 6 million people. We've had 12 races in 24 years in this state. Think about this number. We've had 12 races in 24 years in this state that have been decided by less than 30,000 votes. Think about that. So that makes us very, very purple. That makes every vote count. The game of just spending time here or just spending time there is over because you can target your voters much more, even by television, much more specifically than you used to. That's been a change, I think, in the Trump campaign. It's the old days of just going and dropping 10,000s of pieces of literature is now go find 10 to 25 people, get to know them, and work them clear till November 5th. So I think that's been a big change that I've seen, and an overdue change that Republicans are doing nationally in this state. I would also say Wisconsin, I agree. I think there are more independent voters there. If you see Ron Johnson or Tony Evers on TV and they look tired, it's because they spent the night thinking about how many of the same people voted for both of them. That'd be a sleepless night for either of those people. And I was with Ron yesterday. But it does get, and it gets down to the Dane County issue and the Milwaukee issue, too, for that matters. For us, two things I say to every crowd, and Ben made me think of it. There are hundreds of, and I'm talking about with respect to us, there are hundreds of thousands of people in this state, I'll say these Republican crowds, who think like us, they act like us, they believe like us, they live like us, but they don't vote. And I'll always say to the crowds, how many people do you know that like that? And almost every hand will go up, right? Because we all know people like that who are with you or with us, but they don't vote. So I always say we have to go get those people. And then I will also say it's always a game of inches, to use a bad football metaphor. It's always kind of, but it truly is the case. But it's what led me to call for early vote. I was the first Republican chairman in the country to come out in favor of early vote. Now, how many of you, by the way, usually vote on Election Day? Just generally, is it generally? How many of you have started early voting in the last 5 years? Or whatever, nobody, right, okay, yeah, right? So yeah, I helped him. And I was like, Ben, have you early voted yet? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, all right, we're done. But I'll say to those crowds, and this is relevant for Republicans, because Republicans culturally have not voted early until recently. In fact, 15 years ago? It was Republicans who voted marginally more early, but not for the same reason we do so now. But I'll use myself as an example, and I'll say, look, I was with Ron Johnson on his 60-city tour. I go by my city hall twice a week, probably 2-3 times a week. I'm on a city housing committee, all that. So I know where City Hall is. I know where the chief clerk, where the clerk's office is. But I didn't vote before I left town, the Wednesday before the election. And I'm like, what? And I leave, and I'm out on the road with Ron doing like 8 cities a day. And so election night, we finish, the election eve, the night before, we finish the final rally in Ron's hometown. I get up at 5 o'clock the next morning and drive clear home to vote. And then turn around and drive back up to Oshkosh. Because we're busy, right? We're all busy. So I use that with Republicans and to also say, because there was resistance to this. I speak about early vote every time I'm out in public or when I'm doing media. There was resistance to it, and I've been on statewide recounts before. I'm very familiar with Wisconsin elections law. So it's not that I don't have concerns about the process sometimes, but I just say to Republicans, look, you cannot go into election day every year 100 or 200,000 votes down and expect to make it up in 13 hours. The arithmetic doesn't work. It's not going to start working. It probably never did work. So 21st century, people.
And so earlier this summer, at the end of July, President Joe Biden announced he was stepping out of the race. It was a big shakeup, despite, some suspicions leading up to it in the weeks before. Former President Trump designed his campaign to run against that candidate and largely had to reconfigure his attack strategy for a brand new candidate. How did that go for the Republican Party, and how has that changed your strategy here in the state?
So funny, well, it's not that funny, but story about that was, so we got Republican convention, because he pulled out, the Sunday, the day after it went public, that he was pulling a plug. So I've been at Milwaukee, who, by the way, did a wonderful job for the Republican convention. I've been going like 18-hour days, 20 days, every day at this convention. I'm just go, media, all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, oh, finally, I'm going to get a day off on that Sunday right after And I'm literally sitting in a bar out in Middleton, going to watch a game with some friends, and then Matt, our comms guy, or someone texted me and said, oh, Biden's pulling the plug. And to which my response was, oh, officially? Because he's pulled the plug a long time ago. And that was it. That was it. It changed. The whole race had changed. Now, in some ways, it had changed, and the initial bump that Kamala Harris got was not Kamala Harris, who had been polling at 37 or 38% favorable up until that point. So it's not like, whew, Kamala's here to save us, because her favorables were terrible, including with most independent voters. It was overwhelming. But Joe's gone, right? So then she steps in, and so it's different, right? It is different. But a lot of the fundamentals are still the same. The 7 big states, roughly, still the same. And largely on the big issues, inflation, the economy, border, violent crime, the things that drive independent voters, not abortion that drives base Democrat voters or things that drive base Republican voters. But while those numbers have changed a little bit, on the things that are going to move voters that are willing to be moved, the basics, for the most part, the fundamentals, are still there. Kamala Harris can't win the election talking about where she really is. Now, one thing you learn as a campaign manager, less probably as a state chair, but as a campaign manager, is when your candidate has to run away from who they really are, you never want to be in that situation, because you're always running against that, right? So Kamala Harris has not had a single news conference since she became the nominee. She will not, the sit-downs with CNN is nothing. She won't do a news conference and answer questions, and I assume she did not do it last night. She has to run away from where she really is, literally the most liberal member of the U.S. Senate, and loving Bidenomics and doing all that, and that is not selling out there. Her numbers look a little bit artificially inflated, but up until 5 days ago, 31% of the people still didn't know enough about her to make a choice. So there's a lot of room in there.
Chairman Wikler, the presidential campaign cycle is, compared to other countries, quite long. People start campaigning for president, more than a year before the election. you had a brand new candidate, not brand new, she was vice president, but a new candidate for president just a few months before the election. How did the Wisconsin Democratic Party have to shift its ground game to, accommodate for getting the voters to kind of shift their perspective towards a new candidate to vote for in November?
So I remember vividly, I was sitting on my back porch. I live in the house that I grew up in here in Madison. I bought it from my mom, who's here with us today. Thank you, Mom. And so sitting on the back porch.
We get along, Mom, really.
And I was on the phone with someone talking about the election, and then both of us suddenly went silent, and my jaw dropped. And I didn't know what was going to happen next in that moment. People had been bandying about all kinds of different scenarios inside the campaign and the party. We were full steam ahead until suddenly something different was happening. And I called for a meeting with all the delegates and then with our state party's leadership committee, the administrative committee. And what I was stunned by is how people just started one after another coming forward and saying, I support Kamala, I support Vice President Harris, let's endorse, let's do this, let's get on board. Just a wave of excitement and enthusiasm. And it was not something that people had predicted beforehand. The polling was all over the place beforehand, but it felt like everyone collectively making a decision at the same time and seeing what was in front of their eyes all along. And if you trace back, that moment was made possible by Vice President Harris visiting our state every year of her vice presidency. She'd been in Wisconsin 4 times already in 2024. She kicked off her Fight for Reproductive Freedom tour, by the way, in Waukesha County in January. And the reproductive freedom, getting the government out of your most personal, intimate decisions, that has enormous bipartisan appeal. It's our most powerful persuasion issue, as well as our most powerful motivation issue. It's something that unites people. They want to make their own decisions about abortion, IVF, contraception. They don't like Project 2025. So she's been doing that work. She's been in Wisconsin, and Wisconsinites, the people who are delegates, people close to the party, have seen her at those events. So they knew what the rest of the country has now found out, which is that she's a phenomenal candidate and campaigner, communicator, speaks with conviction. She is someone whose joy is infectious and whose clarity and toughness is unmistakable. It's why she crushed Trump in the debate. It was something that, thank you, Madison. But this is something.
The operative word being Madison.
I mean, 67% in the CNN flash poll right after the debate. It was, across the country, a recognition of enormous strength. And what we've seen in the campaign, we have had to retool fundamentally to get bigger. We've had 60,000 people sign up to volunteer in Wisconsin. Since Harris became the nominee, and that has meant for us hiring more organizing staff. Going into the data to find more potential voters. A lot of people who were saying that they were not going to vote are now ready to vote. I think this has gone from being a potentially low turnout election to being a very high turnout election. And it's both persuasion and turnout and work to make sure folks know how to same-day register. But on campuses, for example, we're just in a new day. All over Wisconsin, there's a whole new level of engagement. And you can see in polls and data that the likelihood that people say they will definitely vote has shot up. People's enthusiasm to vote has shot up. And that means we have to be in more places at once, talking to more voters at once about more things. Now, on the Republican side, we had the horrific assassination attempt against Donald Trump, which we condemned immediately, and Democrats across the political spectrum, within the Democratic Party did as well, which I was glad to see. Obviously, Republicans horrified as well. And there was a bump up in kind of intensity on the Republican side that coincided with the Republican convention. I don't know that I've seen the same kind of people coming out of the woodwork to volunteer in the weeks that have come since then. What I have seen is a flood of mail from the Republican Party of Wisconsin going to people, including my mom, actually, and lots of other Democrats, with a big thing saying, Trump does not support Project 2025. He's not into it. Don't think about Project 2025. Please don't Google Project 2025, which is an interesting strategy to make people stop thinking about Project 2025. But he had an Agenda 47 town hall in Milwaukee where he sent one of his policy advisors who'd worked for him in the last administration and was a contributor to Project 2025 come and lay out his agenda. And there's something happening where people are reading about what the Trump team's plan is, whether or not Trump is involved in the details, which is not always his strong suit. It's pretty clear the direction that he wants to take the country.
Kamala Harris?
I'm saying it's pretty clear that the folks around Trump, with Trump's blessing, have a plan to turn him into a dictator on day one, to shred our federal government, take away people's reproductive freedom, weaponize law enforcement, do a wave of things across every aspect of American life that most Americans would find shocking if they found out about it. And that means that when people are voting for Harris, they're also voting against Trump as we move into November.
So I want to shift gears here just a little bit. In 2016, Hillary Clinton did not visit Wisconsin. Do you think that the two major party candidates for this election have learned from her mistake and have paid enough attention to Wisconsin as one of a handful of states that will give them the keys to the White House?
So I think it is very clear from the candidates' travel schedules, they know that Wisconsin's the gateway to the White House. Trump was here and he said, if we win Wisconsin, we win this whole thing. And that is what our math tells us on the Democratic side as well. We have this asset, which is that when people see Trump and also very much Vance, they become more likely to vote for Harris. And then when they see Harris and Walz, they become more likely to vote for Harris. So I think more travel is good for us. I think that having a spotlight on both candidates is extremely helpful for Democrats at this moment. But it is very clear that they see, if you look at the Harris-Walz ticket, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are the two most visited states, and Michigan is the third one. And maybe we're one of 7 battleground states, but a lot of people would argue we're one of 2 that are the most likely tipping point states that tip this entire election. And you can see that, both sides are running about $3 million a week of TV ads in the state of Wisconsin, and millions more in digital ads. There's mail going out, there's field organizing happening all over the state, and there's candidate travel constantly to help generate earned media coverage that focuses. You might have heard Vice President Harris last night talking about being with the family of the woman who died after she was denied abortion care due to a Trump abortion ban. And the impact of the candidate coming and telling those stories, that has an enormous effect on helping focus the mind of people who would rather maybe not think about politics most of the time. But it's a reminder of the stakes and the power of people's ballot and the power of the work they can do to recruit their friends and family.
And so, Chairman Schimming, do you feel like your ticket has paid enough attention to Wisconsin as well? Yeah,
there's a lot of political tourism in Wisconsin right now. And with respect to your wonderful mother getting all that mail, I see you haven't had that conversation with Ben yet, but there's time. You don't have to tell him now.
Spend all
I don't
your
want it to
budget
be an
on
embarrassing
trying to
moment
persuade
for
my mom,
Ben.
please.
Multiple visits, both sides, of course. About 70% of the voters, media market in the Golden Triangle in Wisconsin, Green Bay to Madison and Milwaukee. So obviously, right, a lot of focus there in those places. We've seen President Trump several times. I was introduced to J.D. Vance the other night up in Eau Claire. And I would say this, it gets back to what we're talking about and what Kamala Harris can't talk about, because she can't talk about her record. They have to focus on Project 2025, which is amusing a little bit, because I was in Milwaukee for 10 days straight during the Republican convention, and nobody talked about it once. It was a non-issue. They have to try to build something false into something it's not by concentrating on it, but so it's a little bit funny that they have to prop up this straw man on this issue as they do, but not the first time. But the bigger problem is they have to divert people's attention away from, think about how ridiculous it is that a major party presidential candidate in this country won't stand up in front of the media and answer questions. Put all the other issues aside. We've answered more questions here on stage almost than she has, and hasn't done any press conferences at all. She cannot afford to go out and be honest with the people of this country, which is why she doesn't expose herself, just as Joe Biden has not. This had a cabinet meeting for the first time in 11 months. They cannot expose where they are on the actual issues. So actually, I don't mind that. I like to have political tourism in Wisconsin anyway because I'm a junkie. But I expect it, and I'm glad we're one of the big 7 or 8 or whatever number you want to put on that. So for our purposes, it doesn't bother me to have her hear more, because we want what, and I said at a press conference at the Capitol yesterday, I hope one of you gets to ask her a question at a news conference, because basically nobody has, and the numbers are overwhelming there. So I think having, just like any campaign, having this much attention in a state on the major party candidates is a good thing. I talk to folks, colleagues, and I'm sure you do, from other states, bigger states that you might think, and they're either so far gone that you can never win them, or they're so far in the bag that you can never lose them. So it really does. It was what, 41,000 votes in 3, and that's where the real trick is. It was 41,000 votes in 3 states 4 years ago that decided the presidency. So I just caution people generally as you look at all these national polls. I said to my chiropractor a couple of weeks ago, I said, if I jumped up in town every time I saw a new poll result, I'd be in the chiropractor's office every single day of the week. So I don't get excited by this. It's the other things.
So let's talk about vice presidential candidates. Senator Vance is relatively new to the national scene. He's, a first-term member of Congress, thrust into the spotlight.
Right.
How do you think he is handling that attention and serving as an advocate for the Trump ticket? The vice presidential position is a unique one in the sense that, they have to be a cheerleader for the presidential candidate, an attack dog, publicize the platform that they're running on.
Go to foreign funerals. Yeah.
It's an interesting role. So how do you think he's handled that spotlight being so new to national politics?
I will tell you that I've been with him 3 times when he's been in the state. Yale-educated attorney, very terribly bright guy. And I've talked to other folks in the delegation, including some Democrats, who say, yeah, he's a very bright guy. One of the things, so I'd never really had a lot of exposure to him before seeing him at the convention, to be honest. And so I was kind of interested to see him doing Q&A, because he does Q&A at every single event. Unlike Kamala, he does Q&A at every single event he shows up at. So the crowd will be here, media platform and back, and he'll literally do Q&A with the crowd or with the media platform. And he's very, very good with the media. And with answering Q&A and being a terribly bright guy and a good messenger. So I think we'll take him as much as we can get him here in Wisconsin. Now, most of the media attention, right, is always with the presidential candidates. That's what drives it largely. But now, because we're in Wisconsin, every time a vice presidential candidate shows up, people come flocking, media comes flocking, because you just don't get that many, hits at it. So, and I look forward to him contrasting against Governor Walz. And I say that with, and I'll apologize for this, but I have family members in Minnesota. And they have been moderate Democrats, and because of Governor Walz, they're voting for Trump, and because Governor Walz has been an awful governor of that state. He got reelected by a lesser number than he got elected by the first time, and lost his old congressional district by 8 points. We're within 4 points of Biden in Minnesota right now. So I look forward to that contrast.
Same question to you. Governor Walz is not quite as new to the national scene, beloved by some in Minnesota. How do you think he is handling the role as vice presidential candidate, advocating on behalf of Vice President Kamala Harris, and kind of taking that and running with it? Given that, again, it was picked relatively recently, speaking as far as election cycles go.
I will say, we can see in the polls, we can see enthusiasm in the crowd, that Governor Walz is as beloved as J.D. Vance is repellent, especially to women across America. And it's been so striking. And I think that the source of it is a sense of joy that you get from Governor Walz, that he celebrates and loves all kinds of people. He knows how to order donuts, for example, in a way that does not alienate the people in the donut shop. And he can communicate in a way that is very familiar to Wisconsinites. So many people have said to me he's like their dad, in a state where, as you've noted, most people in Wisconsin live in smaller communities. More than half the state lives in communities of less than 15,000 people. He's someone who's very relatable to folks from smaller communities, and the kind of person that no matter who you are, what you look like, who you love, you can see that he's someone who's going to respect you. The assistant coach for the football team, who is also the advisor to the Gay Straight Alliance at his high school when he was a teacher, is someone who can relate to everybody. He's done amazing things in Minnesota. We disagree about them. Voters reelected him in a year that was supposed to be a red wave in Minnesota. And what we can see on the national stage is that he is firing people up. I saw him at Labor Fest. He was so good, and he is somebody who clearly respects the hard work that people actually do in their lives. He's not bankrolled by a Silicon Valley billionaire. He's a person for the people. Now, we're going to see a debate with him and with J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, he's a Yale law educated lawyer, absolutely. He seems to be smart enough to recognize that his path to power is to reject all the things that he used to say about the guy who he's now running with. The one consistent conviction for him seems to be the support for a total abortion ban and wanting to remove women's control over their personal lives. But everything else, it seems like, is negotiable on his path to power. In the presidential race, it sounds like you would like to see more of Vice President Harris answering questions spontaneously. So I hope we can join together in calling on President Trump to agree to a second debate with Kamala Harris. I think that's something that would meet both of our goals. And she's doing interviews. I have every confidence that she will do more. She's also doing a ton of other stuff in a very short time in a way that is beyond anything that I think either of us have ever seen. We've never seen a presidential campaign build out all these things this quickly with this much success. It's been extraordinary to watch, and I think reflects the kind of president that she'll be, meeting unexpected situations with an enormous amount of clarity, focus, grace, poise. I've been blown away by both parts of our ticket, and I'm very excited about the 45 days to come.
And so both of you have mentioned, campaign ads, campaign ad spending so far in this election. A lot of what we've seen have been, these classic election attack ads. Do you think people are tired of that? Do you think they work, especially in the Senate race between, Eric Hovde and Senator Baldwin? Those have gotten pretty nasty. Do you think that really breaks through to the voters, or, are they tired of their Olympics being interrupted by, flinging rumors back and forth?
So I think both things can be true. People can be tired of political ads, and they can work. And it's the thing about politics. We're almost like the Olympics in the sense that probably not a lot of us in this room think about the javelin throw competition, except for a few minutes every 4 years. And the people who ultimately are undecided right now, or are thinking maybe they won't vote, but then they do vote, those people feel the same way in many cases about politics as we do about the javelin throwing in the Olympics. They're people who don't really want to watch political ads. They don't want to watch debates. Sometimes they see an ad out of the corner of their eye, or someone shows them a viral TikTok. There's these little moments that break through. These ads, the reason why people who are watching, MSNBC or Fox or CNN see ads all the time is because 1 in 100 of those ads will reach someone who is at a bar and they happen to have news on TV. And it's the people who are least seeking out politics who become the voters that are most fought over by both of the two sides. For those voters, they'll probably just remember a handful of things when they walk into the voting booth. It might be childless cat ladies, J.D. Vance's phrase saying that women who don't have kids are miserable and hate their lives. Maybe they remember it because Taylor Swift signed off on her endorsement of Harrison Walls by saying childless cat lady. But that now is stuck in their brains, and they think that's what this ticket thinks about me. And I think in both campaigns, there's lots of debate about all these substantive, meaty things, but the core values that we want to convey and that we want to make clear where our candidate stands and where Trump and Vance stand, you have to say things a bazillion times before it's going to sink in with somebody who is actively trying to tune out all this stuff. And that's why it's surround sound in Wisconsin, and frankly, it will be until the polls close on November 5th.
Chairman Schimming, your perspective on that as well. Do you think attack ads really break through, or are people tired of them?
They do. No, Ben's right. They do break through, and we're all right. And the thing is now, unlike 20 years ago, it's not just TV ads, right? Or it's not just radio ads. It's you pick up your smartphone, it's everything, right? And so I think about that when I look at ads in this market where the Democrats are more dominant on TV. They're almost all negative. So for all of Kamala's joy that she finds in her life, the majority of the voters, in fact, about 70% of the voters, are not finding much joy in their lives after the last 4 years. And that's what's going to move voters, particularly independent voters. If she can talk about joy all she wants and pound away on one thing or the other, but the truth of the matter is, I always say there's a grocery store test on everything, right, in your life. And Ron Klain, the president's first chief of staff, when gas prices were, he would always say, look, gas is the only commodity you buy that you see the price several times a day, right? If you drive around, you see the price all the time. And that's my grocery store test as well. When with respect to the U.S. Senate race too, a lot of ads, right, on the U.S. Senate race. So when I get people that, I was saying this last fall, because Tammy's numbers Tammy's numbers were only in the high 30s on her favorables about a year and a half ago now. And so I'd have reporters telling me, national reporters, telling me, oh, Tammy Baldwin's too tough to beat. And whenever I'd hear that, I would go, oh, have you happened to see U.S. Senator Russ Feingold around lately? Because I haven't. And he got beat, not once, but twice, by over 100,000 votes. So the voters make their own decisions, and the effect to the extent on messaging, whether it's TV or broadcast, otherwise, there is a lot of repetition. It is not going to go away. I'm sorry to tell all of you. It's hard to turn on your TV or radio these days, or even pick up your smartphone. But you're fighting over, I think, a larger group of people than you see in other states because Wisconsin is more purple. So whether it's in the mail or digital or TV or radio or any number of ways that people get talked to these days, but there's a lot of intensity. Lee Dreyfus used to say that he thought half the money in politics was wasted. He just didn't know which half. And a little bit of truth to that, right? But the risk side of backing off on that intensity might be a quarter of a point, which loses you the election. So the intensity continues.
Well, we've got a stack of audience questions here, and we won't be able to get to all of them, but I do want to start asking a few of those. And we'll start with you and then move over to Chairman Schimming on this one. This says, our politics are indisputably more acrimonious than they were 20 years ago, referring to political polarization. Why do you think that is?
So 20 years ago was 2004. And Wisconsin was the closest state in the country that year. We had, I believe, 17 visits from one ticket and 18 visits from the other ticket after the conventions in Wisconsin. And politics was very intense then, too. At that time, people talked about the heydays of when Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan would get together over a drink 20 years before. And how had things come to this point? The reality is politics is acrimonious when the stakes are really high. When there's broad agreement about most of the core values of a society, it's easy to tone down the temperature. And we try to, I think, practice a politics where we can disagree without being disagreeable. But we also, both of our parties are going to work their hearts out, because certainly for me as a Democrat, I think it's a profound risk to so much if Donald Trump gets back into power. And I think the opportunity to make things better for so many people is so enormous if Harris and Walz win this election in November. And because we're evenly split, there's so much to fight for, and that extra ounce of intensity could be the thing that makes the difference. And in general, what you see is that turnout grows when elections are closer. When it's clear who's going to win, there's much less reason to vote. And when there's an obvious winner in advance, there's really no reason to throw everything you possibly can against the wall. But in a state like Wisconsin, where the outcome is in doubt until the final moments, 4 a.m., when they finally finish counting the absentee ballots, because Republicans refuse to allow the early counting of absentee ballots in our state, at that moment, you look back and you think everything we did contributed to a victory that happened by a hair's breadth. And that's the fundamental thing. I think appeals to civility are great, and I hope that people will behave civilly, and I hope that we can, and especially in a moment of frightening violence and the threats of violence, what's happening in Springfield, Ohio right now, terrifying. The attacks on Donald Trump, which don't seem to have a partisan motivation, but they represent a culture of violence and people with easy access to weapons who probably shouldn't be having them. All of that, I think, calls on us to try to find a path to civility, but the intensity and the stakes in our politics will be this high, I think, as long as democracy itself is on the line, as long as freedom and bodily autonomy are on the line, as long as the freedoms of workers to organize are on the line. These things used to be consensus questions, and they are not at this moment. And I think that is one of the big things fueling the intensity. Even if the other side views the same issues from the other end of the telescope, I think it's driving both sides to throw everything they can into these fights.
What do you make of the polarization that we're seeing today?
Yeah, it's interesting because I started in the university or at the Capitol years ago as Dave Prosser's chief of staff. We had split control, the Assembly and the Senate, or we had all Democrat control at that time, and then Tommy Thompson was governor, right? So different time, ancient stories, all of that. But I would say that a lot of our base is motivated by the fact that freedoms are under attack and government agencies have been weaponized, in fact, legally weaponized, against some of our coalitions and against the legacy of some of that ugliness has turned people pretty worried about their future. And this started under the Obama administration, has gone on under the Biden administration, and will probably go on if Kamala Harris is elected president. So the point that a lot of people see that things are at stake. Now, how many of you remember when they used to call Wisconsin flyover country? Remember that? They call us flyover country, right? Which we can't even imagine now. So Hillary Clinton took that to heart and flew over Wisconsin. Literally, actually, flew over Wisconsin, which was a mistake. And my friend Russ Feingold was calling her, because he was up that year too, in 16, when he was up in 16, begging them to get into Wisconsin. And so we go through these different moves. I mean, frankly, you look at Act 10. You look at the attempted recall of Scott Walker, which is probably the ugliest thing I've seen in state politics. I wasn't working in the building at the time, but I had an office across the building. But I'd walk, I was doing some talk radio, and so I'd walk over to the building every day, literally across the street, because frankly, I wanted to go on the radio and talk to the media and say I was there. Not just sit in a radio studio out on the edge of town and just go, oh, look at all those crazies down there. I wanted to say I was down there. Got pushed around, had my life threatened, had all of that. That's probably one of the most ugly moments in the recall, which I'm against recalls generally, against Democrats or Republicans. I think it's horrible for the institution and for voters. So you look at what the Democrats pushed through at that time, and I think in the state, you've seen it dramatically worse since those recall days, which I just think there's no joy in recalls and the ugliness that went, regardless of what you think about Act 10, it was the ugliest time probably in 100 years in Wisconsin politics.
So we've got, just a couple minutes left. And speaking of political polarization, I'm going to hit you both with a fun question. What is something about your counterpart that you think he does well?
I think he's one of the best organizers in the country. And I've said it publicly, and so I've said, the easiest thing, for me to do, especially sitting here, is to trash him. And but his mom's here, and I didn't want to. My mom's 93. She couldn't make it down there today. Then she would disown me. So I think he's an extraordinarily bright guy and a good organizer. And I think in Wisconsin, the Democratic Party, and I've been through several very good, some very good people, and And a former Democrat legislator came up to me about a year and a half ago and said, you've got to pull your party to a different place on some of these issues like early vote and some of these types of things. And I said, well, I'm going to. I said, but I take the attitude that we're all in. You got to be all in. And I think that's what Ben does. And if you're going to win in a state that, frankly, again, may likely, right, the Electoral College, what happens here will reverberate in the Electoral College. You got to be all in.
What do you think about this guy? What does he do well?
So Brian is a great communicator, and he's a genuinely kind and decent person. And I think for a lot of Democrats, people, and Republicans can fall into this about Democrats. Democrats can fall into this about Republicans. They discount the character of people on the other side of the aisle. And my experience with Brian is that you both embody decency and also extend it and call it forth on the other side. Obviously, we trade barbs and jabs, but the way that you interact with your team, the way you interact with my team, the way you interact with the folks that we see in public and and behind the scenes, that is to me the ideal way that politics should be. That we trade blows in our arguments, but that we can actually comport ourselves with a kind of fundamental decency. And I also think one thing that's very effective about what Brian does, we're in a moment where both sides can kind of get lost in jargon and inside references and assumptions that people will share a set of facts about the universe that really come from partisan media on either side. And a lot of Republicans at this moment, if you hear them talk, and you can't necessarily follow the plot because there's a lot of embedded references within it, and Democrats do the same thing. Brian doesn't do that. Brian communicates like a human being who doesn't assume a particular point of view in his audience and connect, on campus in Madison and in rural Wisconsin, in the 7th Congressional District up north, and everywhere in between. And that, I think our politics is enriched when we have the ability to communicate with people who disagree and who agree, and for people who aren't paying attention. So that's something I really appreciate about you.
Chairman Wikler, Chairman Schimming, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all for joining us. We have other events here throughout the rest of the day, so stick around, and we appreciate you being here.
Just be aware that the breaks this afternoon are only 15 minutes, not the 30 we've had all week. Just welcome back.